Today, we are looking at this quality of equanimity, which is more than simply neutrality. That what is meant by equanimity in Buddhism, it is a huge theme. It is one of the four Brahma Viharas, the four boundless abodes that we cultivate that include loving kindness, beginning with loving kindness, moving into compassion, into what we can call appreciative joy or empathetic joy, as taking delight in the well-being of others and in their good fortune, and then equanimity, upekkha. It's supremely important as a way to balance out compassion, which we're going to do in 2 weeks. What we call fierce compassion. It is also that which dissolves the barriers. Equanimity. What is equanimity? This odd term that maybe we've heard in literature. Yeah. I don't know about you. I don't use it every day. I don't say, "Oh, you're displaying a great amount of equanimity, sir." It sounds so. I don't know. I'd say, "Hey, good for you. It sounds like a balanced way of thinking." Yeah, this is my speech. I don't know what you say, but anyway, it is a term that bears some unpacking, particularly in the Buddhist context. It is also that window, or rather that passage, that vehicle into peacefulness. And in the Indriya Bhavana Sutra from the Pali Canon, the Buddha tells us that peacefulness and equanimity, that these two are inextricably linked. It's very hard to achieve any kind of calm abiding or peaceful abiding without a good sense of stability and equanimity. Otherwise, our preferences are acting out right, left, center, behind us, above us, below us. So if we think about equanimity is not necessarily a lack of engagement, but it is a lack of preference. We are still the meaning of equanimity in the Buddhist context is that we remain very much part of the world. We remain engaged. We remain present to it and clear with what is happening, but rather without necessarily grasping to outcomes, needing things to be a certain way, or having preferences is, I like this person, I don't like that person. This kind of thought is a pleasant thought. This kind of thought is a terrible thought. I don't want to think those thoughts. I want to think these thoughts. You see, all of this clinging and grasping and rejection is sort of the opposite of equanimity. And so here we are attending to all things as they are with an even mind. There's an evenness of mind. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with someone or necessarily ascribe to what they're doing. On the contrary, as we'll see with fierce compassion in a couple of weeks, there is a force here that can challenge things that are unwholesome in the world. So equanimity is more of that stability that balances out the softness of compassion. We need equanimity to give us stability within the body, within the mind, a mind that is stable and present and not being sort of jarred or bandied around. We talked about this a bit last week when we talked about non-duality. How do we sort of work with opposites? And I gave you the example of when I was younger, working with my teacher around fear, and how much the opposite of that was trust for me. And so it was important to be able to sort of attend to my fear and know, oh, trust is here, the antidote to that fear. And yet I was still caught in the polarity. I still don't want the fear, and I want more trust, and this will help. And yet, many of us who do sort of deep dives into our psychology and into our trauma histories and all of that, we can still be stuck with these kinds of dualisms. And so we're not content to sit there, but rather to find the middle way, the non-dual state, which for me, in my example last week, was surrender. Once I really understood that surrender was at the heart of the issue, those polarities just vanished. I had to really incorporate surrender into my practice consciously. And that word doesn't work for everyone, and that's fine. These qualities we work with are very specific to very different for everyone. But the main point here is that equanimity is this sense of evenness of mind. It's not a lack of engagement, but rather an absence of preference, of clinging to preferences. It doesn't mean we don't have aspirations, but that's slightly different. So the Buddha tells us equanimity is like a drop of water landing on a lotus leaf and rolling away. It doesn't get absorbed. This is peacefulness in equanimity. In essence, our mind is like the leaf of the lotus, or rather our sort of a consciousness or awareness. And all of the distractions, the bubbles, the raindrops are the distractions and thoughts that we have them. We can't stop the rain necessarily, but they sort of just roll off. This is sort of a metaphor for the quality of equanimity. In the Indriya Bhavana Sutra, he says, this is peacefulness and equanimity, like a drop of water landing on a leaf of a lotus and rolling away. And therefore, this quality of equanimity really helps us to cultivate stillness. It helps us to cultivate this peacefulness when we can drop into that state of equanimous awareness. And we can do this in the physical body. This notion of what we can call proprioception, or that I am inhabiting this physical body that is inhabiting a place in time. It is here in a space. And this body is a support for my practice. It's a support for many, many things. Ideally, if it's healthy and pain-free, but even so, it is physical. And if I'm sitting upright, my spine is just naturally supporting me. And so stability in the body, in the spine, in the posture, rooting and groundedness in a groundless world, in a world that is increasingly has become virtual, groundless in many ways because we are not physically together. Yeah. So we need to really ever more, I think, cultivate that sense of natural groundedness and stability in the physical body. So some of us spend tremendous amounts of time on our screens. So we need to come back, just be reminded of that. So I also like to think of equanimity as transparency, interestingly. And I'll give you an example. I used to live in the North End, right on a block from the water. And we had one of those hurricanes a few years ago. I don't recall the name. I can never remember the names of these things. But it was the one that really slammed New York when it came through. It was hitting Boston as well. And the back of my building that I was living, I was on the 5th floor of an apartment building at the back. And the wind was pounding. Literally, it sounded like there was an enormous hammer just like banging the back wall of the apartment building. And I decided this is a good time to practice. Practice what you preach. And so I had my cushion and my little altar back there and everything. And so I decided to sit. It was a time where I was really struggling. My marriage was starting to crumble apart. Financially, I was kind of really walking on a thin line there, and it just felt like everything was just really difficult and challenging and almost hopeless. But that meditating through that hurricane was so cleansing. There was fear every time it would wallop the back of this building. My heart would go, ooh, are the windows going to hold here? But once I became transparent, this is the point to this, is that the transparency of being, even though I was in a physical body and I was rooting myself there, transparency of mind, that it felt as if the wind and all of this sort of concussive stimulation was just passing through me. I literally had no fear sitting there, even though the wall was literally 2 feet from my head. So this is possible to do. This is possible to do. It takes some practice. Yeah. This isn't necessarily just, oh, I'm going to sit and do what Chris did, because who knows if he could do that again? We don't know. We haven't had a hurricane since then. But I've found it helpful to just kind of think about transparency as equanimity. Equanimity opens us up to this sense of all things moving through, yeah, without having to contract around them, even though we are stable and we are in a physical body. So, three other qualities: non-reactivity. How do we do that? Yeah, how do we not react when the central nervous system is so easily triggered with unfolding events in the world? Um, at least it is for some of us, I think. Things around, the Supreme Court and other things that are happening out there, racism and, war and not to mention pandemic, all these things that we all know about. How do we not or how do we attend to reactivity? How do we attend to that reality? This is what we talked about a couple of weeks ago in refuge. Why is refuge important? And feeling safe and feeling this space of cultivating and showing up just as we are, not needing to be different. Um, so, non reactivity, non preference, meaning one thought arises, it's energy. It's not as real as it appears. It's also quite impermanent. Every thought comes and then it vanishes and a new one arises. Yeah, I'm just watching the mind play out, live out impermanence. So, impermanence is next week. So, we're going to look at a little bit of the four seals and how important impermanence is to this attending to reality. So, no preference. The Buddha, in his mindfulness sutra, the Satipatthana Sutra, tells us to watch what arises in the body, in the feelings, in the mind. Notice whether it is pleasant, notice whether it is unpleasant, or whether it is neutral. Yeah. In the noticing, he's not telling us to fixate on these things. He's telling us simply to notice. And in the noticing, this is what he doesn't tell us, but this is largely the sort of alchemy of mindfulness, is in the noticing, there is what we can call a decentering process, that we are now no longer immersed in it, but we are bearing witness to it. We're coming into being in awareness itself, into what we call metacognitive awareness, which holds the experience of it in a more open way. And then we also, the fourth stage of mindfulness, vipassana, or insight, we watch how impermanent it truly is. There is more truth in the disappearance of a thought than its arising in some ways, yeah, because it's revealing its nature as impermanent. Doesn't mean we're not having an experience, but so preference, noticing the nature of things, noticing how we're relating to what comes, and then also allowing it to evaporate when it's time. And then non-judgment, an important part of this equanimity. Again, non-preference is part of this, but we're also not judging ourselves, which is often where a lack of equanimity arises in practice. Oof, I'm not feeling what I want to feel. I'm not able to sit still. Here comes that feeling again. I'd rather check out, so I may fall asleep, or I may struggle, or I may fight the thoughts. I may feed them energy. All these ways of relating to them that are really just a sign of suffering, of discontentment. And so part of this is also recognizing the wakefulness of the mind in a very subtle way, this refined awareness that Longchenpa tells us is actually quite natural. It's quite unitary. It's not parsing things out. It is open. It is clear. Um, and in so doing, we begin to perhaps recognize a little more that freedom itself is fully inclusive. That with equanimity, not only does stillness arise more easily, but so does inclusivity, that all truths are available to us. Now we're not just sort of going, no, not this, but that. We're not doing that whole sort of preferential treatment, but we are relating to things in a more unconditional way. We're allowing for all things to exist as they are, ultimately existing in paradox. Yeah, and embracing it, because paradox is only apparent paradox. It's not actual a paradox. So, um, what it allows us to do is what I like to call the power of stopping the play, despite the odds. And part of this also involves right effort. Where is my energy going right now? Where is the effort right now? Seeing where it's going, changing the relationship to it a bit. Um, and things change when we hold them differently. They appear different to us. We bring more creativity into it. Anyway, I'm going to stop in a moment here. Lama Gorsam, who is one of the wonderful new monks coming up in the Gardrolma, the Drikung lineage, and he's also a friend of Lama Willa, who's a friend of mine, and I've sort of attended some of his online events over the last year or so, and he did this one on the 9 stages of meditation that I really enjoyed how he presented it. Um, and it's interesting that according to the 9 phases of shamatha practice or calm abiding, sustained voluntary attention and mindfulness practice, he begins, or rather the teachings begin with simply resting the mind in shorter spurts. I allow my mind simply to rest for as long as it does, or as short as it is okay. Yeah. So it's the training to focus on breath and on an object of awareness, such as Andrea's lovely little being there, who's who just he drooled his approval into the camera. He's a sweetheart. Um, anyway, and the idea here is the mind will wander. It just will do this. Yeah, it will just constantly be being just sort of dragged away here, or triggered by that, or what have you. And one of the things we talked about last week also, that around non-duality, is the recognition that no matter where my mind goes, I don't need to drag it back to anything. I just need to remember that the spaciousness of naked awareness is always going to contain wherever my mind goes. So it's a subtle difference, but for me, it's made all the difference in the world. Just to be reminded that, yeah, maybe I do need to bring my attention back to the breath, but I also can remember that as far as my mind wants to go, it's never out of view, out of range of an awareness that is much more spacious than anywhere that the attention can travel. It's still being held by spaciousness. So, um, anyway, nonetheless, the first stage, as I said, begins with resting the mind in short moments and working a bit with concentrative attention. And then when you reach the 9th stage, here is where we begin to abide in equanimity, yeah? Resting in effortlessness, in equanimity, where awareness, mindfulness is effortless. All things that come and go have sort of a similar nature. We see them as energy, not as real fixed things, and we watch the play of energy arise even in our own reactions to what comes and goes. Um, my teacher Leslie used to tell us, she used to say, look, the more you practice, you will stop seeing the world as fixed, physical, real things with forms, and you will start seeing all things more as a play of energy and interacting energies, and all things arising together and dispersing, and dependence upon causes and conditions. And I found that absolutely true. It's changed my perception to see things in that way. So here we rest in equanimity, in the sense of effortlessness. I'm going to leave you with this quote by Nyoshul Ken Rinpoche about the possibility of finding refuge and finding this equanimity in the midst of samsara. So Nyoshul Rinpoche tells us, rest in natural great peace, this exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by karma and neurotic thinking, like the relentless fury of the pounding waves in the infinite ocean of samsara. Rest in the natural great peace. Rest in the natural great peace. This is an echo, it's a shout out to Longchenpa, that despite what's happening having confidence that this natural great peace is at the heart of your awareness. It is the underlying nature of your mind. It is clear, it is luminous, it is always present. And as the Buddha tells us, mindfulness is a continuous quality of this form of who we are.